Becoming a Canadian citizen is a real journey. It's this deeply personal choice to officially belong. It's a path that millions have taken to formally join the Canadian family. But what does that journey actually look like? Let's dive in and explore the path to Canadian citizenship. Right from the get-go, the official study guide, Discover Canada, starts with this really welcoming message. It gets right to the heart of it, acknowledging the sheer courage it takes to start over in a new country. It frames this whole process not just as paperwork, but as joining a great, ongoing tradition. That's a pretty powerful way to set the stage. So what does it really take? It's a journey with a very clear destination. But the path itself has specific milestones, a whole bunch of legal requirements, and even a few big debates along the way. So let's break down exactly what it takes to become a Canadian citizen. Okay, first things first, it's really important to understand that the whole concept of a Canadian citizen, as something separate from being a subject of the British Empire, is actually a pretty new idea. The identity itself has evolved, a lot over the last century and a half. The idea of being Canadian was really built step by step. Think about it. Back after Confederation in 1867, you were just a British subject who happened to live in Canada. Then, in 1910, the Immigration Act introduced the label Canadian citizen, but it was mostly for practical stuff like residency rights. The big moment, the real game changer, was 1947. That's when the Canadian Citizenship Act created a distinct legal Canadian citizenship for the very first time. And it wasn't until 1977 that the term British subject was completely scrubbed from our laws. So, if you're a permanent resident today, where do you even start this journey? Well, it all begins with meeting a set of fundamental, absolutely non-negotiable requirements that are all designed to prove you have a real connection to the country. And the cornerstone of that connection, the number that really anchors the whole thing, is this: 1,095. That's the number of days you have to prove you are physically in Canada during the 5 years right before you apply. This isn't about your intentions, it's a hard, verifiable number based on time spent in the country. Okay, so beyond just being here, there's a whole checklist you've got to tick off. First up, you have to be a permanent resident. You also need to have filed income taxes for at least 3 of the last 5 years. And if you're between 18 and 54, you've got to pass that knowledge test and prove you can communicate in English or French. And of course, it goes without saying you can't be under an order to leave the country. All right, you've met all the criteria, you've sent in that big application packet. Now what? Well, you've just entered what the slide calls the application gauntlet, the official processing phase. Let's take a look at how that structured multi-stage review actually works. See, Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, or IRCC for short, puts every single application through this really intense 6-part audit. First, they screen it just to make sure it's complete. Then they run all the background and security checks. After that, they verify your residency claims, they assess your knowledge and language skills, and only then do they make a final decision. You have to clear every single step to move on to the next one. And how long does that all take? Yeah, that's the big question, right? Well, the government's target, their service standard, is to get through that entire 6-part process in about 11 to 13 months. So yeah, it's definitely a marathon, not a sprint. That's the time frame you should probably expect. Okay, a huge part of this process is the citizenship test. So let's have a little fun. I'm going to throw a sample question at you, one that's inspired by the official study guide. Take a second to think about it. Which one of these acts is a constitutional foundation of Canada? And the answer is B, the Quebec Act of 1774. This one's a really big deal because it officially recognized the French-speaking population, restored their civil laws, and allowed Catholics to hold public office. This is a perfect example of the kind of stuff you need to know for the test, a real understanding of Canada's history, its government, its laws, and its symbols. But here's the thing. The rules for citizenship, they aren't set in stone. Not at all. They're constantly being debated, challenged, and updated to reflect Canada's changing society and values. It's a living, breathing thing. This is a perfect example. Let's look at how citizenship gets passed down to kids born outside of Canada. The old rule, the second-generation cutoff, it was complicated. The new rule, though, it simplifies things by focusing on that tangible connection. Now, if you're a Canadian parent who was also born abroad, you just have to prove you lived in Canada for 3 years. That's our magic number, 1,095 days, before your child was born to pass on citizenship automatically. Much more straightforward. Now, At the same time, we're seeing some trends that are a bit concerning. While most immigrants do eventually become citizens, the rate for recent immigrants has actually been declining. And there's this widening gap based on income. In 2021, the citizenship rate for recent immigrants in the highest income bracket was over 20 percentage points higher than for those in the lowest one. And that gap has been getting bigger over time. Another debate that's always simmering is birthright citizenship. See, Canada is one of the few developed countries left that grants citizenship to pretty much anyone born here. And a documented rise in births to non-resident mothers has kicked off this whole conversation about so-called birth tourism. Now, just being pregnant is not a reason to be denied entry, but hiding the fact that you intend to give birth here could be seen as misrepresentation, and that can have some serious consequences. So after all that, after navigating the history, the requirements, the paperwork, the tests, the entire journey comes down to one single, really powerful moment: the citizenship ceremony and the taking of the oath. This right here, this is the oath every new citizen takes. But I want you to pay close attention to the wording that was added in 2021, a pledge to observe the laws of Canada, including the Constitution, which recognizes and affirms the Aboriginal and treaty rights of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. That part is so important. It was a direct response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and it literally embeds a recognition of Indigenous rights right into the core pledge of citizenship. And with that oath, the journey is complete. It unlocks the fundamental rights of being a full participant in a democracy: the right to cast a vote in an election, the right to run for political office yourself, and, of course, the right to travel the world holding a Canadian passport. You know, the path to citizenship is all laid out in laws and procedures, but the meaning of being a citizen, that's always evolving. It's shaped by our history, our shared values, and by every single new person who chooses to call this country home. And that leaves us with a pretty personal question to think about. What does being a Canadian mean to you?
For free Canadian citizenship practice test, you can either click the link in the description or simply scan the QR code on the screen.